Hey everybody, this is Eric Stark with Radio Arizona RV. Today's show is episode number 57, and it is going to be about water lines and fittings and what you should keep in your RV toolbox. And so this episode is based on the amount of customers I have that come into my store or call and have questions about water lines, what fittings they need, what fitting's going to work. And quite often there's some confusion in thinking that everybody just knows what an RV has, what fitting goes to the toilet, what fitting goes to a faucet. And in a lot of cases, those fittings are narrowed down to one or two, but the question of what size the line that the RV has comes up. A faucet takes a 1/2-inch pipe thread fitting, a female pipe thread fitting. Same with an RV toilet, but the water line going to it might be 3/8 or it might be 1/2 inch. So those are the questions. And then does the fitting have an angle on it or a 90 degree or is it straight? So trying to narrow this down a little bit and help you to understand, maybe before you go to the store, be a little more prepared, take pictures, bring a sample. Samples are always the best. Pictures help quite a bit, especially with water, fittings and lines. Sometimes you can really tell what it is. Sometimes it's harder to tell. But a sample, you walk in the door with it, this is what I need. That can't argue with that. So breaking this down, I want to go into the different types of fittings, the different types of lines. Not going to take real long. And then kind of a pricing structure too. If you compare the different brands and fittings, that might be the decision maker for you. Well, I don't want to spend that much and this cheaper fitting will work, or this fitting looks might be a little more expensive, but hey, I think it'll be easier to use. But before we get into that, talking about the different fittings and tubing that goes in an RV, I just want to remind everybody to check out our website, radioarizonarv.com. And remember, that takes you to all of our other websites, SunPro, Hot Boat Ropes, Arizona RV Parts Centers, where we sell all of our products online. And also to join our emailing list and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Check out our page on Facebook. We're going all in on social marketing, so we have to advertise this or I have to talk about it. But it just makes it easier, more places for you to get connected. And I also want to throw this out there. I would like to know if you would appreciate a Facebook group. I'm thinking about starting one where, as listeners to the show, Radio Arizona RV, and this is a show about RV maintenance and education for the do-it-yourselfer, so the group would be designed for like-minded persons to share ideas and thoughts, and I would throw in stuff, some pointers, some tips and tricks and things like that, and also answer questions. So if you'd appreciate something like that, email me. Go to radioarizonarv.com and use the contact us page there, and you can just email me. Tell me what you think. So I'd love to start something like that, but I want to make sure that you guys want it, that it'd be beneficial to you. Okay, so now back to the show here. Again, this is episode 57. This is about PEX fittings and PEX waterline for RVs. And most RVs use PEX tubing in them. They might use some soft vinyl tubing, some reinforced vinyl tubing. There's going to be a little variety there, but most all the time it's going to be 90% PEX tubing. So I think the tubing is straightforward. And it might be gray, might be black, or not black, might be red, might be blue, might be white, kind of an opaque white. That's all PEX tubing. It's all interchangeable. So if you have gray and you go to the store and they hand you white, shouldn't be any problems there. The PEX tubing is pretty straightforward, I believe. Now the fittings are a little bit different. I'm sure most stores carry flare-it fittings. That's probably going to be the most popular fitting. If you go into a store and tell them you need to work on your water system, they're more than likely going to have a flare-it fitting. But there are different brands of fittings, and I'm just going to go through an order here. I'm looking at a sheet I have, and C-Tech is the first one on my sheet. It doesn't mean it's the best or the worst. It's just the first one I typed out. Now, C-Tech works with PEX, CPVC, and copper. CPVC is an off-white version of PVC in a unique size. It's not the same as PVC. But in an RV, you're not going to find a whole lot of CPVC or copper as far as what we're talking about today. But C-Tech fittings will work with those two other types of tubing. And some RVs have copper, but not for water. It's generally for propane. So you want to use a water fitting on a propane system. And a lot of older RVs, I shouldn't say a lot, some older RVs had CPVC in them. So it might be an option there. But that's not very common anymore. You don't see that a whole lot. But C-Tech fittings are very similar to shark bite fittings, which you find in Home Depot, Lowe's, places like that. Shark bite fittings are primarily a residential application, if you ask me. They're built a little bit different. They're, I think, built more for the long haul. Not that these other brands for the RV industry aren't built for the long haul. But if I was building a house, I'd use shark bite before I use any other brand of fitting, period. Because in a house, it's getting built into the walls, all that good stuff. So once it's there, it's there. You want it to last. So C-Tech fittings, you just push the tubing into it. And that can be really handy if you're working in a tight spot. It's hard to get your hands in there, get any tools in there. And you get the old fitting out, maybe cut off a piece of line, replace that. And you need to put another, let's say a T in there. A C-Tech fitting just pushes right onto the line. So you can just push the lines into it, and C-Tech fittings are reusable. You can actually undo them. You can do it by hand, but it's easier if you have what they call collet clips, little clips that slide over the tubing, and you push down on this little plastic piece inside the fitting, and it releases the water line. Shark bite is very similar to that. They have orange clips that you push down on the fitting, and it releases the water line. So C-Tech fittings, I think, are really good if it's going to be a hard to get, really tight spot. Push that water line in, make sure it snaps, bottoms out, and it's in, and you're good to go. And C-Tech fittings, they come in many different sizes, so it'll work just about any application in an RV. So, good option. Then there's Quest fittings. Everybody knows Quest. It's been around forever, since the 70s. It used to be very big in the RV industry. And today, Quest is not that big in the RV industry. Now, Quest fittings work with PEX tubing, and their fittings are gray, and they use a threaded, let's say a T. It would use a threaded T, then it takes a cone, a nut, and a washer. And the nut and the washer go on the tube, and then the cone tightens up onto the threaded portion of the fitting. And they work pretty good. They're just kind of clunky. They're old. They don't adapt to every situation. Harder to use. You got the nut and the washer. And, the washer can go bad. It's just a rubber washer. PEX are actually a rigid plastic washer. I shouldn't say washer, cone. The washer itself is kind of serrated, and it holds the fitting or the pipe in the fitting when you tighten it up. And they are reusable. You can take the nut off the fitting, but, if you need to replace the washer, you're going to have to replace, cut the line, take the washer off, and start all over. Not into the world here, but you really don't see that much Quest anymore. Although people do refer to PEX and PEX fittings as Quest, because it was just such a popular name used for so long. But Quest is not really I would say, a viable option anymore, because there's just better things out there, easier to use. And I'm going to do a price comparison in just a moment to kind of help break that down as well. Then the next on my list is flare-it fittings. As I said, are probably the most popular you'll find in an RV store. And they just work with PEX. PEX tubing, that's it. That's all they're designed for, is to work with PEX. Period. Straightforward. Flare-it fittings are pretty simple to use. It has a nut. You take it off the fitting. Then you push the tubing onto a barbed end of the fitting. Slide the nut onto the PEX tubing first, and then tighten it up after you push it onto the fitting. Real simple. Easy to use. No special tools required. But they can be hard to use in a real tight spot if you can't get both hands in there and push the line on, because the line is kind of hard to push on. You kind of have to wiggle it back and forth, but it makes a great connection. And they're smaller, compact. Quest stuff gets kind of big and bulky. Flare-it doesn't get that way. C-Tech is similar inside to Flare-it, maybe a little bit smaller. But the flare-it works good. I mean, that's what we carry. I used to carry C-Tech. No one ever wanted it, so I dropped it. Might bring it back. Now we're in a different state, different people, different needs. But the flare-it's kind of a go-to. And now another brand is called BestPEX. Now the name's kind of deceiving because their fittings are designed for PEX, but all their fittings are brass. So they're made to have the PEX tubing clamped onto it with a stainless steel clamp that's made just for it. Shark bite has the same system as well. It's a brass fitting that slides into the PEX tubing, and you clamp it on with the stainless steel clamp. Now the clamp you have to use a special tool on. You can't just use pliers. It requires a special tool. I guess in a pinch you could use a certain pair or a certain type of pliers to tighten it. But the tool they have works the best. They're about $75 though. But if you plan on doing a lot of this or using a lot of it, it makes it easier. Now The best PEX fittings are the brass fittings that are barbed and the PEX tubing slides over it. If you're building a new RV and you wanted to save a few bucks but still do a good job, this would be the way to go. Or if you're doing a lot of plumbing and you can get the tools in there, or the tool to crimp the stainless steel rings, that would be fine. It's going to work. It's going to last. It's just down the road. If you didn't have the tool, if you borrowed it from your buddies, you're out on a trip and one of those fittings start to leak and you can't tighten it up, you're going to have to cut it out and put in another fitting, probably a flare-up fitting or a C-Tech fitting. And that's where the downside could be. So if you're going to get into the best PEX or the brass type fittings with the crimp rings, you want to just buy the tool and have it. And then those would be some things that you'd want to carry as spares. I'm kind of jumping ahead here because I'm going to get into what you should have in your toolbox in a moment. But best PEX is a good option. And then, as I said, shark bite, that's number 5 on my list. So I got 5 names on my list. And shark bite, I'd say, is just for residential. Leave it alone. They get very expensive. They're quick fittings where you just slide the tubing in. They're brass, so they get very heavy too. So bouncing down the road probably isn't the best thing for a shark bite fitting either. It might stress the line, start to leak. It could do other things. So I don't think I'd use shark bite. And just because of the money factor, it'd be enough for me. So C-Tech, Quest, Flare-It, and Best PEX are your options. And for me, Flare is what I stock in my store. I like Flare-It, but C-Tech would be a good option too for those hard to get places. And then of course, Best PEX for clamping in. If you're just doing a lot of work, you want to clamp it in and be done with it. I have friends that have used that in remodeling restaurants and places where the plumbing's exposed. They could do it inside, but they just happen to do it where it's exposed and works great. Years later, it's still working, no leaks. It's very clean looking. A brass fitting with just a stainless steel crimp ring on it. Doesn't take up a whole lot of space, nice and clean. But now if you're looking at this price-wise, like let's say you just want to find a fitting and go with it, whatever that brand is, whether it's Flare-It, C-Tech, Best PEX, Quest, you're going to say, you know what, I'm just going to pick a brand and I'm going to try to stick with that. Get everything the same in my RV. Or maybe your RV has a certain brand and you want to just keep with that. Maybe it has all C-Tech fittings in it. Maybe it has all Flare-It. Maybe it's using a Best PEX type fitting. Best PEX is a brand, but there's other types of fittings like this. Just like I said, Shark Bite has it. Well, to help you with that, if you look at pricing and what it costs per fitting. So if we go with a half by half by half T, that's going to take the PEX tubing. So it's not going to be threaded. It's just going to take the PEX tubing. So the Flare-It fitting would run $6.69 for a half by half T. No tools required. Tighten it by hand. Give it a little more twist with a pair of pliers. Now, Flare-It does have a new fitting out called PEX lock fittings, and they're a little bit different. They're similar to the Best PEX in a way. You slide a ring over the tubing. You slide the tubing onto a plastic fitting, and then you use a pair of pliers to tighten the ring. So it locks down on the PEX, and then they're reusable. So that's a little bit different than the other stainless steel type clamp. It's plastic, just use a pair of pliers. So in some hard to get places, that might be another option. If you can't get a big crimper in there, you can get a pair of pliers in there. I'm not 100% sold on these. I haven't used one yet. I'm going to have to use one, try one out. I'm going to get some ordered up in the next week or so to test them out. But they run about $6 per fitting. So that'd be the T and 3 clamps. So that isn't too bad. And if it works, no leaks, and it lasts over the long haul's the thing. If it lasts over the long haul, then that might be a really viable option, or even an option to have in your toolbox in case of an emergency, tight situation, you just need to get back on the road. And then the Best PEX brass fittings with the stainless steel clamps. So you'd need 1 fitting and 3 clamps. That's going to run about $587 plus the tool, which is $75 or more. You might be able to find one cheaper. The last one I got was $75. Shark Bite one was over $100, so I opted for the cheaper one. They do this exact same thing. And then there's C-Tech with their push-in fitting, so half by T. Push in the PEX line to it. Now that's a reusable fitting, so you can reuse it. If you had to take your plumbing apart for some reason, you can put it back together. You just need to be able to release it, and the collet clips, like I said, are the easy way to do that. They're cheap, they're pennies a piece. So that fitting will run $9.59. And then a Shark Bite fitting, half by half T, would run $11.97. So that's suggested retail. You might find them for more, might find them for less, but that just gives you a nice average price. The flare-it fitting really, to me, comes in best. You don't need a tool for it. It's $6.69 for a half by half tee. You tighten up the fitting, put in the line, tighten it up, and away you go. But that's just me. So I would look at this on what's easier for you and maybe do some research. Go to the websites, go to an RV parts store, ask them to see the different fittings, see if they have them. And then you become a little more knowledgeable, see what your RV has. You have to be logical about it and don't go 100% on dollars. Don't look at if you get the brass fittings and clamp on a ring, that might be cheaper, looks a little cleaner, but is that the best way to go? Okay. So you have to decide, it's your RV, look what's best, what's in there, and kind of determine if you want to switch it over to something else or stick with the same. Now, the nuts and bolts of this, what you should keep in your toolbox. And this is probably the most important thing because a lot of vacations get ruined because of water leaks. I have a friend who does mobile RV repair, and all he does is Yellowstone. And during the summertime, he describes it as like a MASH unit, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. Everybody's on a trip. They just want stuff fixed. They don't care. And so he just goes in and he fixes stuff and gets them on the road. And that's fine because they realize their trip is going to be ruined. But a lot of these people have rental RVs. They borrowed someone's RV, or maybe it's their RV and they just don't know how to do anything, or maybe they don't have the parts to do it. So they call him up and he goes in and does it. And he doesn't do a slipshod job. That sounds kind of bad, a MASH unit, but that's what he likens it to. But he does good work. I would trust him. His repair is going to be good. But why pay him? Because he gets a lot of money. It's not cheap to have someone come out. If you're on a trip, you also have your family. Maybe not too happy. They're not thrilled with you. What happened to this RV? Why did it break again? This is the second water leak on this trip, How much time is this going to take to repair? You guys know. You've been down this road. I'm sure everybody out there with an RV who's listening to this podcast has had water leaks that cause major problems. And any water leak is a major problem. So what I would recommend to keep in your toolbox, first off, would be a PEX tubing cutter. They're probably $12 to $20 depending on what type you get. And the reason why I recommend one, for one, they're completely safe to use. Yeah, you could be kind of ridiculous, ding dong, and cut the tip of your finger off if you really wanted to. But rather than using a razor knife, a big pair of scissors, some wire cutters, a hacksaw, they just are so much easier to use, and they don't take up a lot of space to keep in a toolbox. It's minimal, and for $12 to $20, they work great, and they cut the tubing off square, so it's not at an angle. You're not trying to clean it up when it's done. Like with a hacksaw, you're going to have to clean off the end, file it now. These things just cut it, and you can cut them off in tiny little bits. If you make the tubing 1/8 of an inch too long, you could actually cut off 1/8 of an inch of the tubing with these. Very accurate. So that's what I would start out with. And then when it comes to the waterline or the PEX tubing, 1/2 inch and 3/8 are going to be the most common size you're going to find in an RV. 3/4 inches out there, but I would check your RV to see if you see any 3/4 inch anywhere. If there's none, don't even worry about 3/4 inch. We stock very little 3/4 inch PEX tubing and fittings, very little, because it's just not that much out there. You don't get a big call for it, so you might not even have any 3/4 inch. And then the 3/8 tubing, you might not have a lot of that either. You might just find it underneath the sink, going to a faucet, maybe to the shower. You're probably not going to have a lot of that either. The 1/2 inch line is the most common, and I'm talking about the inside diameter of the line. The outside, like a 1/2 inch line, is 5/8, but everybody just calls it half, so that's what I go with. So 1/2 and 3/8 are going to be the most common size, and in some stores you can find it where they sell 5-foot sticks of it, and a stick is easier to carry because it's just straight and you can just put it about anywhere, kind of easy to store. Where if they have to take it off a roll, it's going to be coiled up, a little harder to work with. Stores carry it because they can get 100 feet, 200 feet on a roll, whatever it is. And it's easier for them to just pull it off a roll and cut it. It doesn't take up as much space, easier to work with than sticks, especially if they're doing service work. But the sticks of it are ideal. Consider that when you're buying it because you're going to store it in your RV. But I'd have at least 5 feet of the 1/2 inch for sure, And depending on your RV, maybe 5 feet of the 3/8 or 2 feet, 3 feet, whatever. But a 5-foot stick is so cheap, under $5, I would just buy the sticks. And you don't have to have these just for an emergency. The PEX line, the PEX fittings, you have it in your RV for an emergency. But, if you're at home just preparing for a trip, or your RV's just parked and you get a water leak, it's not a big deal. You just use these fittings and the tubing and then just make sure you replace it. That's the key, making sure you replace it. Now, it might be easier to not use it and just go to the RV store and buy the fittings you need and the tubing and use that. That way you haven't messed with your safety net there, your fittings in your toolbox. But when it comes to the fittings, this gets a little more, I'm not going to say trickier, just a little different. You're going to need, obviously 1/2-inch and 3/8 fittings if that's the water line that is predominantly in your RV. If you have 3/4 inch, then you'll have to add 3/4 inch to the mix. Now, in the fittings, it's going to vary on your RV. But throwing some fittings out there that you probably couldn't go wrong with would be some T's. So it's going to go 1/2 to 1/2 to 1/2 or 3/8, 3/8, 3/8. I don't know if I'd mix that up and go 1/2, 3/8, 1/2 or 3/8, 1/2, 3/8. I would just go one size on the T's. And then you could get some reducers to go from 1/2 to 3/8. That way, if you did have a T in the RV that was a unique size, maybe one fitting on it was 3/8, you could, adjust down. You have to kind of look at your RV and get a feel for it. But if you carried a T or a couple T's, 1 3/8, 1 1/2-inch, then couplers from 3/8 to 3/8, 1/2 to 1/2, maybe, 2 1/2-inch and 1 3/8. Then there's going to be adapters that go from the PEX tubing to a female pipe thread and a male pipe thread. The PEX to female pipe thread are probably more common. That's what you'd use on your toilet to connect a water line to your toilet, or to connect water lines to your faucet and even your water heater. Now, in some applications, you will find a PEX fitting or PEX tubing to a male thread. If I were going to stock that in my RV or my toolbox, I would just carry a 1/2 PEX to 1/2-inch male pipe thread. Then the other adapters, you might want to have, at least 2 1/2-inch PEX to 1/2-inch female pipe, and then maybe a couple 3/8 PEX to 1/2-inch female pipe. I don't think I would get a 3/8 PEX by 3/8 female fitting for pipe. Not that common. But like I said, look through your RV. There's only a few fittings that like we really sell, because that's just what every RV uses. So I wouldn't go beyond that. Typically, with what you have, you could probably make something work in an emergency if you didn't have the exact right fitting. You could probably, cobble together several fittings, some tubing, and make it work. But also, some RVs are going to have unique fittings in them. Now, I've had people bring in fittings with water lines on. The water line looks like PEX tubing, and it's about 1/4 inch in the outside diameter, and it has a 1/2-inch female pipe on it, female pipe thread fitting on it. So it's going like to a faucet, then to something else inside the RV, maybe to a main water line, or they're used in different areas. Now, fittings and tubing like that, and these ones that I've seen, they're pre-made. They're not made somewhere. They're made in a factory. They're stamped out 2 feet long. That's it. You can't modify them. And, sometimes you can adapt that to the 3/8 PEX tubing, which is fine. It'll work. But if you're concerned about it, some of those you might want to get from the manufacturer of your RV in advance, if they're available, or check with an RV store to see if they can get them for you. But if they're real unique, you might want to just have those from the factory, something to be an exact replacement. That way you don't have to mess with it later on. That's pretty much it. That's not that complicated. So I would recommend, like what I just went through, but I'm going to put some pictures on our website of the different fittings, the different, the PEX tubing. I'll be having a few more details about, Flare It, Best PEX, Sharkbite, Quest, C-Tech, the different brands. I'll have links to their websites. So that'll help you and, your decisions. But knowing this information helps you. So when you go into an RV store, you're not going in, hey, I need a water fitting for my RV. And that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But I get asked that all the time. And I ask, what size is the fitting? I don't know. It's a Fleetwood. And there's a difference. So you go in knowing what you're talking about, and it's going to be a much more pleasant experience, believe me. Everything I do, whether it's my home, my cars, my RV, my podcast studio, I go in armed, knowledgeable. I am a do-it-yourself, big-time do-it-yourselfer. And I try to be knowledgeable, so when I go in, I know what I'm looking for, and I get what I need, and I don't get some runaround, or I have to go back home or back to my RV or back to my car to figure out what it is the guy's asking. I try to go in with all that in advance. So that's going to wrap it up for this show, and I hope it was helpful. I know there's a lot of talk about the brands and stuff and how they work, but it just makes you more knowledgeable. So when you go into a store and they say, well, we don't have Flare, we have C-Tech, you're not going to be, oh, no, what am I going to do? You're going to be able to, okay, I understand. I know what that is. I can deal with that. Okay, so in the next few episodes, not sure which order these are going to be in, but I just want to let you know I'm going to talk about RV lifting and lowering blocks, that go on your axles to lift or lower your trailer. And lifting is probably more of an issue today than anything else, so we'll just call them lifting blocks. Lithium batteries. We are working with a company now trying to get a line of lithium batteries for our store and also to get them to do an interview on the podcast. So I'm looking forward to that. And the lifting blocks is something we're going to pursue. We are going to be making our own. We're working on that, getting all the pieces put together. Energizer generators. If you need a generator, Energizer is the brand, and that's going to be an upcoming episode. And also for air conditioners. If you have a hard starting air conditioner, it won't start off your generator. We have the solution for you, and it's made by MicroAir. So anything I just mentioned for a future episode, if you have a question about it, give me a call or email me. Use the contact page on Radio Arizona RV, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it and answer your questions. So I want to thank everybody for listening today. And again, this is Eric Stark with Radio Arizona RV.